Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Interdependence is the Key to Liberation and Justice for Disabled People by Dom Kelly. My name is Brian Medina. My pronouns are Z, here, and heres. I'm a non-binary person with long brown curly hair and dark brown eyes. I have dangling multicolored earrings, and I have a white dress with blue and orange designs. My background reads Black Lives Matter. I'm grateful to be in virtual space with each of you today, and I'm honored to be your moderator. Thank you also for those who sponsored this session, the President's Commission on Disability Issues, or PCDI, at the University of Maryland, the Maryland Developmental Disability Council, or MDDC, and the Graduate School's Office of Graduate and Diversity Education, Diversity and Inclusion, OGDI, at the University of Maryland. We also want to share that pursuant to Maryland law, we are required to provide verbal or visual notification of recording. If you continue to participate after being notified that the activity is being recorded, your consent to recording is implied. And we love the fact that we have accessibility services available for this session. So American Sign Language interpreters, video will be displayed during the entire session. Attendees can pin videos or remove interpreters from their screen. For a better view and experience, we recommend that you use a desktop device versus a mobile app. Zoom captions will be automated, or you can view them in a separate window on your device by selecting the link in the chat. And so without further ado, I would love to introduce Dom Kelly to introduce yourself to our audience.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dom Kelly. I use he, him pronouns. I am coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia on Muskogee Creek land. I am the co-founder, president, and CEO of New Disabled South and New Disabled South Rising, the first and only regional disability organizations in the United States. A visual description of myself: I am a white man with curly brown hair, wearing a gray patterned polo and sitting in front of a green couch with framed pictures above it on the wall. A little bit more about me. Prior to founding New Disabled South, which is a 501c3, and New Disabled South Rising, which is our 501c4 arm, I previously served as senior advisor for disability on Stacey Abrams' most recent gubernatorial race. Prior to that, I worked at Stacey's voting rights organization, Fair Fight, as a strategic advisor for disability. I serve on the boards of disability organizations like the Kelsey, the Society for Disability Studies, and I am a longtime disability advocate. So I like to say that I was thrown into disability advocacy by my parents when I was 4 years old. My mom literally put my brothers and I in front of a classroom of high school seniors and said, "You're going to tell your story, good luck." And my triplet brothers and I were all born with cerebral palsy. So from the start, we were empowered to share our stories. I've heard time and time again from friends in the disability community that they barely knew any other disabled kids growing up. But that wasn't my experience. Not only did I have a built-in community at home with my brothers, but I was actually surrounded by disabled kids. My mother chose to work in the space. She owned an early intervention agency, and we started doing physical therapy when we were a year old with other disabled kids. We would go to their homes, they would come to our home, and it was like group physical therapy. So I had community. And from a young age, I was actually taught to be both independent and interdependent. But it was actually learning to be interdependent that shaped the way that I've lived my life. So we know that one of the core principles of disability justice is interdependence. In order to achieve liberation, we have to help each other. We have to meet each other's needs. Interdependence recognizes that we are all a part of a whole. So I think about the independent living movement. Now, while the independent living movement has been focused on disabled people achieving independence, they've made enormous progress for our community. but we are still suffering from the impacts of a capitalist society that puts value on human productivity for profit. And in that vein, I argue that independence can no longer be the goal. For the entirety of human existence, disabled people have been othered, oppressed, and excluded, whether it was the eugenics movement or ugly laws here in the United States. Here in the States, these systems that our country was founded on have left out disabled people from the start. The disability rights movement focused on working within those systems to achieve independence and freedom. But the path to true justice and liberation, I believe, is outside of government, policy, and law. And I say that as someone who has worked in politics and policy and still continues to work within those systems. So I wanted to see what interdependence was defined as. I just Googled the definition of interdependence, and Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines interdependence as the state of being dependent on one another, or mutual dependence. That's pretty clear. And there's ample evidence that proves that social justice movements work when people work together rather than separately. In Justice in Teams, the effects of interdependence and identification on referent choice and justice climate strength, Robertson compared levels of interdependence in undergraduate student teams to see the impact that interdependence had on their perception of fairness and justice internally to the team. Robertson found that teams that were highly interdependent were more likely to examine their intergroup practices and also had higher levels of team performance. This approach to work, relying on a team rather than independently, fosters an environment of gradual improvement and continuous accountability, which leads to better outcomes. I also found in my research that in interdependence and group effectiveness, Wageman found that, quote, highly interdependent groups use the collective skills and knowledge of their members to get their work done, end quote. Wageman found that the sense of responsibility that each member of an interdependent group shared in regards to the outcome of the work at hand led to mutual learning and ultimately a higher performance. So that's clear to me that working interdependently improves outcomes. But I wanted to know how has it impacted the effectiveness of social justice movements? Two of the core tenets of disability justice are cross-movement solidarity and collective liberation. So we know that in order for all of us to be free, we have to come together, even with those outside of the disability community from other social justice movements. In Part of a Whole, the interdependence of civil rights movement and other social movements, Rollins explored whether or not the civil rights movement of the 1960s was truly successful, and found that its effectiveness in gaining rights for Black Americans had to do with the ability of the movement to be interdependent with other social movements at the time. Additionally, in recent years, we've seen the impacts of coalitions, of mutual aid efforts, and more on both the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the 2020 uprisings against the police state in America. In 2022, Kumar analyzed the mutual aid efforts of groups when the COVID-19 pandemic began and found that while there was still a necessity for government services in helping our people, that crowdfunding initiatives, grocery collection, distribution, and other community-focused efforts improved the lives of those most impacted in this pandemic. And when George Floyd was murdered in 2020, different ethnic, racial, religious, socioeconomic groups all came together to work toward changing the public mindset on policing in America. Rutgers researchers recently examined the effectiveness of these multiracial, multi-ethnic coalitions that sprung up around this time and found that, quote, collective mobilization benefited all groups when these conditions were fulfilled, leading to, for example, the election of many Black mayors in large cities who increased minority hiring and funding for minority business, even when the Black electorate was small, end quote. They also noted that decreasing the competition between these marginalized groups benefited the whole rather than the parts. So as we in the disabled community continue to grapple with the realities of our capitalist society, an ongoing pandemic that continues to kill millions, policy choices that keep our people in poverty at twice the rate of non-disabled people, legally making pennies per hour and shut out from the right to marry the people they love, the prison industrial complex that disproportionately impacts Black and brown disabled people, an institutional bias that forces disabled people into nursing homes and unsafe congregate settings, the weaponization of neurodivergence to justify stripping trans people of their right to exist, and more. The list goes on. We must focus on solutions that break the silos we often find ourselves in, and rather bring us together to fight for all of us. When I was beginning to form the idea for New Disabled South 3 years ago, I recognized not only that there was a need for a regional approach to organizing, but that a strong coalition that worked to solve the dire needs that so many disabled folks in the South have gone, it was necessary, that the needs of our people have gone unattended by those in power. I recognize too that yes, we did need to find policy and legislative solutions to problems and work within the system to an extent. But after a while of working in politics and working in policy and seeing how close we would get to passing bills that would lift our people out of nursing homes, to passing bills that would give people access to care, I ultimately saw that these don't save us. The government would not save us. We save us. We save us by coming together to take to the streets and demanding more. We save us by caring for each other instead of relying on our government to provide that care. We save us by showing that we are more powerful together than apart. At New Disabled South, our Southern Disability Justice Coalition is forming, and we want to figure out how we can work to organize hyper-locally while also looking at the issues through a regional lens, because we know that the issues that disabled communities in Georgia face, they are facing in other places like Mississippi and Texas. We have to move beyond this thinking that the goal is to achieve independence. I'm going to quote A.J. Withers, who said, "Another myth that is firmly upheld is that disabled people are dependent and non-disabled people are independent. No one is actually independent. This is a myth perpetuated by disableism and driven by capitalism. We are all actually interdependent," end quote. Every one of us is part of the whole. So I believe that when we move beyond the limitations of the disability rights and independent living movements, who have done enormous work and made enormous progress, but when we start to center the voices of the most marginalized in the disabled community, and when we come together with non-disabled people who are also fighting for progress, and we all come together collectively, I believe that we can finally find the freedom that we have been searching for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dom. That was amazing. We have about 12 minutes left or 11 minutes left. We would welcome folks in the chat to be able to share any questions they have for Dom. As folks are thinking, pondering their questions thoughtfully, there's a question in the chat. Thank you, Ron. Twitter has often been seen as a great tool for disabled organizing, but given what is happening to it, what tools do you recommend for local organizing?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I've been pondering myself because I really relied on Twitter to find community. It has been a lifeline for me as a disabled person, and so many of us here. I think that while it is so critical that we have disabled community across the world, we actually can push more toward finding our community here locally. We can start to go closer to this hyper local organizing that we're working on with New Disabled South, figuring out how we bring disabled people together here where I live in College Park, where we have made enormous strides in College Park, Georgia, but that we still have so many issues that impact disabled people. The inability for our people to purchase homes here, inaccessible public transportation, sidewalks, physical access, that while we can find that community online, it's been really valuable. We've been able to push our president, our Congress to actually do some decent things. But that my hope is that we can start to like figure out how we can work together here on the ground to actually get these big wins, I think are big wins locally, that actually lead to greater change. So, while some of that is more difficult in an ongoing pandemic, I think we have been able to always figure out ways to find each other, meet each other where we are. And I think that that's how we can kind of figure out how to organize beyond Twitter and these kind of big social media platforms that unfortunately seem to be kind of falling apart and right in front of us.
Thank you, Dom, and thank you for the question. Continue on. Wonderful questions. One thing that I was wondering, Dom, as you were describing this elements, and I'll get to the question in a moment, the other question, that thinking about local organizing and maybe some examples that you can provide folks, kind of tangible ways in which they could access some means for advancing the work. So, any examples you'd like to use?
Absolutely. So, one of the things we're about to release this week with New Disabled South is how local governments can use American Rescue Plan funds to actually improve, their cities for disabled people. So we're using examples of how cities have actually done that, which is really wonderful. But also, we know that so many of those things that they have done come from years of people in the community showing up at city council meetings, showing up at their local neighborhood associations and fighting for, one of the examples is, we highlight the fact that there are accessible playgrounds being built, right? But like, this is not a new ask. These are things that people have been asking for years. So what we have to do is continue to show up, continue to demand more. Um, ask, we have to ask them to include us. Like, so many city council meetings, unfortunately, are not available to participate virtually. And so many of us can't leave our homes and be in a room full of crowded people while a pandemic is raging on. So we have to demand more. Another good example, that is inclusive of disability justice movement, but kind of across movements, is here in Atlanta. We've got the Stop Cop City movement, and we have been, folks have been fighting to stop the building of this police training facility that would just militarize police, and also cut down acres of forestry that would impact our environment in a negative way. And I think that's a really great example of so many different groups of people coming together. We have abolitionists, we have people who are not abolitionists, we have people who are not abolitionists but concerned about our environment. We have disabled folks coming together to say police actually harm us rather than help us. And so we're the Stop Cop City movement, which I have, been doing, my part to be a part of, but I'm certainly not a leader in. I have been really inspired by their approach to this organizing. They're bringing in folks from other movements. And I think that that's a great example of how we can be interdependent, right? That we can come together as disabled people with, our racial justice folks, our climate folks, our abolitionist folks, and figure out how we can work toward one goal.
Thank you so much, Dom. Another highlight somebody mentioned in the chat is accessible playgrounds are great, but accessible bathrooms Bathrooms close to those playgrounds are important too.
Yep.
We have another wonderful question here in the chat. How do you propose navigating between working to change legislation and also recognizing its impotence ultimately? How do we work to make change within a broken system while also implicitly dismantling it? Also, do we organize hyper-locally while also broadening the scope of disability rights into a global movement, as we saw with BLM in 2020?
Yeah, great questions. I think to start with navigating between changing legislation, recognizing its impotence. I mean, that is the $1 million question. So many of us in our community um, rely on our legislators to fund home and community-based services, to expand Medicaid so that we have access to healthcare. Those impact our day-to-day lives. So there is a need for policy change. That's within this system that is set up right now that we are living under. It's unfortunately necessary. What I think that we can do is continue to say to those people in power that it is not enough. And while I am a dreamer, I dream towards a world where we are not living under this system, and I think that we can achieve that. We also have to learn how to work both within it and outside of it. So we show up, we crawl up the steps of Congress to push for the ADA, which we know is the floor, not the ceiling. We do those things, but then we also focus on mutual aid. We also focus on care collectives, where if you don't have funding for a caregiver from the government, let's figure out how we as a community can help care for each other. So I think that that's how we start to move towards working outside of those systems, and ultimately, hopefully, dismantling those systems of policing, systems of government. And then that hyper-local organizing, I think the power of hyper-local organizing helps strengthen the broader movement. If we can say, we all came together here in College Park, Georgia, and we had XYZ really incredible wins here, we can then have a blueprint for other communities to do the same. And that just strengthens our overall global movement. If we can be able to point to these like really local, hyper-local wins that we can achieve when we come together locally.
Thank you. That momentum is so important. And one of the questions in the chat aligns with that is for us, for many of us within the disability community, we often find a variety of reasons we can feel ashamed or isolated when doing this work. You shared this a bit, but are there additional ways in activism for disabled folks, what that might look like?
Yeah, I think that it's really I have sometimes felt isolated in this work. I have sometimes felt isolated. I come from working in non-disabled movements, non-disabled focused political spaces, trying to carve out some kind of disability focused work. And that's been difficult. Thankfully, I've had like the support of leadership in those spaces I've been a part of. But a friend of mine said once to me that those spaces often are not there for us, so we are gonna have to create them ourselves. And what I have found is that in order to break that isolation, I have to find like-minded people to work with to build it. So like when I was at Fair Fight, I created our disability portfolio. Fair Fight was fighting voter suppression across the country. And I felt really alone at sometimes, because while I had the support of people to do this work, I was the only one who actually had the lived experience and was like as passionate about making that happen. So when Stacey asked me to join her campaign, I I built a team of disabled people. We built a department focused on disability engagement, and I built that together in community with those disabled people. And that's how I built New Disabled South. I had the idea, I knew I wanted to do it, and I went to my friend Casey Amon Wilson and I said, like, let's do this together. and we built this team. So I think that helped break the isolation. And so I'm focused on finding those like-minded people and building our collective power together. I hope that answered the question.
It did. Thank you so much. We are sadly at time. This is such an engaging conversation for us all. We didn't get to every question, but thank you so much, Dom, for your time, for your talents, and sharing with us some insights in how we can continue to do this work together.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Dom. So for folks that are just joining us, we will have about a 10-minute break between now and the next session. We welcome you to do whatever is right for you in terms of that break, and welcome you back in another 10 minutes or so. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to a novel way to address the disproportionate rate at which youth with disabilities are overrepresented in the school to prison nexus. My name is Brian Medina. My pronouns are Z, here, and heres. I am a non-binary person with long brown curly hair and dark brown eyes. I have dangling multicolored earrings and have a white dress with blue and orange designs. My background reads Black Lives Matter. I'm grateful to be in virtual space with each of you today and am honored to be a moderator for this session. Please feel free to tweet and share the happenings at the summit and follow us at include disability, at IDGS, hashtag including disability, hashtag 2023 Disability Summit, and hashtag Hope Punk. Thank you also to our sponsors, the College of Education at the University of Maryland, and the Graduate School's Office of Graduate Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Maryland. Pursuant to Maryland law, we are required to provide verbal or visual notification of recording. If you continue to participate after being notified that the activity is being recorded, your consent to recording is implied. Gratefully, we have accessibility services for this session. American Sign Language interpreter's video will be displayed during the entire session. Attendees can pin videos or remove interpreters from their screen. For a better view and experience, we recommend that you use a desktop versus a mobile app. Zoom captions will be automated, or you can view them in a separate window on your device by selecting the link in the chat. Cart service can be enabled by selecting the closed captioning feature located on the bottom bar within the Zoom webinar to enable live caption within Zoom, or on your own device by selecting the link within the chat. Please post all questions in the chat, and we will select a representative sample of those questions for the presenters to answer in order to conserve time at the end. Now I'd love to welcome our presenters to introduce themselves before they begin their session, and also ask presenters with slides to describe the images, if they have any, being presented. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is Tiffany Hurst, and I use the pronouns she, her. I'm a Black woman with short hair. I have on short silver earrings and a black and white outfit. I am a PhD student at Drexel University School of Education. I have a master's in special education, and my son, my daughter, and I are all neurodivergent, and my daughter has several other disabilities.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monet Harpison. I am a Black woman with short, curly, brownish red hair. I'm wearing a green shirt with a black cardigan. My background is that of a chair with shelves and a lamp against a white room with my name written in cursive in the right-hand corner. I am a neurodiverse PhD student from Drexel University, a first-generation student, and I'm excited to be here with you all today.
And Trifina?
Sure. Hi, my name is Trifina Hooper. I am a Black woman. I'm wearing a bunch of different colors, but my jacket is yellow, and I'm in front of a virtual background of, I don't know, a hunter green wall with a chandelier of sorts. I am a first year part-time PhD student at Drexel University, and I'm happy to be with you this afternoon.
Good afternoon. I am Taraya Hudson, she, her pronouns. I am a neurodivergent PhD student in her third year. My child is also neurodivergent. My background is of the Drexel University colors, navy blue and gold, with a white stripe, and over in the right-hand corner, it says Drexel University. I am a Black woman. I am wearing my hair into twists. I have dark colored glasses shaped like a hexagon, the frames, and I am wearing a gray shirt with pink flowers. I am happy to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tamika Pinkney. I am a part-time first-year doctoral student at Drexel University. I am a Black woman. I have on glasses that are kind of tortoiseshell looking. Also green dangly earrings, a Black scarf, a white shirt, and a gray sweater. My background is muted because I'm in my principal's office and he has an Eagles flag in the background. No hate on the Eagles, but just blurred it out. And I am a teacher of 22 years and I teach a range of abilities of students. I'm happy to be here this afternoon as well.
So today we'll be talking with you about the school to prison nexus, zero tolerance policies, disproportionality, potential solutions, and one novel solution. So the school to prison nexus consists of a complex web of policies, ideas, and institutional practices that converge to link the school and prison regimes. The school to prison nexus highlights systematic historical and multifaceted linkages that support practice and policy. The linkages converge in a way that ultimately results in youth with disabilities, minoritized youth, and low-income youth being taught by unqualified teachers, tested on unreviewed materials, held back grades, placed in special education, suspended multiple times, removed to alternative schools, and ultimately being pushed out of school, which leaves them vulnerable to arrest and incarceration. Indeed, many students are arrested while in school. Monet?
Yes, I couldn't see, the slides aren't being shared.
I see. If we can get those slides.
So I'll get started. We're gonna get the slides up, but I'm gonna talk a little bit about the zero tolerance policies. In about 1982, we saw a shift in the way that we talked about the war on drugs. Reagan enacted zero tolerance policies around drugs, which was focused mostly on inner city neighborhoods. In the late 1980s, zero tolerance policies from the drug war started to make their way into schools. How we treated students, how they interacted with their teachers. They were put in a carceral state at that point. These factors also produced zero tolerance policies due to several rampage shootings that occurred. The Gun Free Schools Act of 1994 also prompted many zero tolerance policies. Eventually, schools across the country began adding non-violent offenses to these zero tolerance policies. So Think of students wearing do-rags or boots or things of that nature, like cultural signatories from the neighborhoods they were. Public displays of affection, even though we kind of normalized the childhood sweetheart, public displays of affection were being criminalized inside the schools. And even truancy, something that impacts a lot of different people. People are late to work all the time, but we don't get imprisoned for it. With the spiraling and spreading of zero tolerance policies, suspensions, expulsions increased. Students with disabilities, minoritized students were significantly overrepresented among those suspended and expelled, due in large part to the phenomenon of disproportionality. So scholars have spent a lot of time studying the origins of the school to prison nexus. Disproportionality is the disparate ways in which youth with disabilities, minoritized youth, and low-income youth are overrepresented in the school to prison nexus.
So for example, between 2013 and 2014, 60,000 students were arrested while at school, and about a quarter of them had diagnosed disabilities. 2.6 million students were suspended at least once, and 63%, about 63% of them were Black, brown, or of two or more races. Black students nationally are more likely to be suspended. They're more likely to be in special education, and are more likely to be disciplined with similar violations as their peers. And that is obviously a challenge, especially when we think about how things like neurodivergence can show up, and things, that can happen in the classroom that can make someone uncomfortable, and how they, can engage as a result, and especially bringing into light the cultural piece as well. So students in special education, many of them are students of color and are more likely to be disciplined, again, because of these zero tolerance policies. And so as a result, disproportionality continues to exist in our school systems, and that perpetuates the trauma and the pain that can come from being in an educational system that is not built for people who are different.
There is research that shows that these disproportionate practices are implicated by multiple interconnected educational systems. For example, overrepresentation of students of color in special education categories, which involve practitioner judgment, such as learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, emotional disturbance disabilities. These disproportionalities, however, do not occur in medically defined disability categories such as hearing impairment, deaf blindness, or orthopedic impairment. Thus, when we dismantle zero tolerance policies, while they can be helpful in some other ways, it will not solve our disproportionality problem. Notably, the categories of learning disabled, intellectually disabled, and emotional disturbance are based on subjective interpretation of observable student behaviors and are not rooted in biological, physical, or medical diagnoses. So the results of this is a reproduction of anti-Black racial narratives within the traditional school environment, where to be Black is to be unintelligent, undesirable, aggressive, and disruptive. Furthermore, Black students identified under these high incidence categories of learning disabled, intellectual disabled, and emotional disturbance are also more likely than their similarly identified peers to be educated outside of the general educational classroom in more highly restrictive and segregated settings. So what are our possible solutions? Some scholars argue that using restorative justice practices, which focus on mediation and agreement rather than punishment, can combat this disproportionality. Others will argue for increasing authentic school community and parental connections within schools as a way to curb this disproportionality that we see. When punitive measures are completely unavoidable, it is noted that limiting long-term removal from school can help in a positive way students who are overrepresented in the school to prison nexus. And finally, when adults take an intersectional view of students' race and disability status, there can be more objectivity.
And one novel way of addressing this program involves the cultural proficiency continuum dialectical protocol. And I'm currently showing a screen that shows the different aspects of the protocol, ranging from cultural destructiveness to cultural incapacity, cultural blindness to cultural competence, and then cultural competence. And finally, at the transformative end of the protocol is cultural proficiency. Dr. Cormier developed the cultural proficiency continuum dialogical protocol to provide a systematic examination of practitioners' cultural competence. Cormier transformed the protocol from a paper-based to a web-based protocol, and it's now referred to as VSORTS. VSORTS uses the cultural proficiency continuum that you see on this slide. VSORTS's core artifact is an adaptation of Q methodology, which is a research technique that is used to understand how individuals' subjectivity shapes their attitudes and beliefs. It is particularly useful in studying complex or controversial issues where people's opinions and values may be diverse or difficult to capture using traditional research methods. Using this technique, Dr. Cormier systematically studies participants' attitudes, beliefs, and regarding asset-based pedagogies, which are an instructional approach that focuses on the strengths, interests, and experiences of learners rather than on their deficits or weaknesses. So we proposed using Dr. Cormier's research to systematically study participants' attitudes and beliefs in connection with the school to prison nexus issue of disproportionality. We would construct VSETs using 6 evocative vignettes within 5 contextual domains. The contextual domains would involve the topics that we just spoke about that involve restorative justice, school removal limitations, cultural practice education, parent involvement, and community involvement. The vignettes would represent diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging issues corresponding to one of 6 behaviors on the cultural proficiency continuum on the slide. We would use scholar-practitioner collaboration in creation of disproportionality vignettes to be validated by individuals actually caught in the school to prison nexus. The purpose of the collaboration is to enable the researcher to consider the on-the-ground issues central to practitioners and to individuals caught in the nexus. The value of using VSORTS is that it's a way to train practitioners about complex school to prison nexus disproportionality issues in a way that promotes critical self-reflection and conversation within professional learning environments. The environment mitigates cognitive dissonance and provides a safe space for all stakeholders by enabling the practitioners to engage in vignettes that have been developed and validated using input from all stakeholders. Once practitioners receive their rating, they will have the opportunity to receive additional training in the specific areas regarding disproportionality where they need it. So we know that was a mouthful, and we've provided references that you're going to be able to utilize. We're going to put it in, we're going to put a link in the chat area. And at this point, we welcome any questions that you might have regarding anything we presented or any questions you have in general.
Thank you so much, Tiffany and all, for providing that amazing insight for us as an audience. As Tiffany mentioned, please ask any questions in our chat window that you may have. Maybe to get us started is open to any of you. As you're navigating the tensions, the challenges in implementing some resolution here, restorative justice or restorative practices sometimes has its limitations for some folks in terms of folks being willing to acknowledge the harm that they cause. You know, what would you speak to as you're thinking through disabled folks and folks of, you know, for Black folks that are experiencing such great harm, that may go through a process where the other parties who are causing harm may not be as acknowledging that harm as they should?
So that is one thing we hope we can address using the VSETs and the cultural proficiency continuum. The continuum is designed to flag areas that individuals might otherwise ignore, including the area of acknowledging harm. And once it's flagged that an individual has a challenge in that particular area, then we would provide professional development that would assess how the individual might be able to reflect a little more and otherwise identify some of the challenges that they are embarking upon that is preventing them from acknowledging the harm.
And I just would also like to add that as we are looking and seeking our own healing in a society that does not always see our humanity, it's important to find fellowship with those who can bring you joy, those who can validate who you are. So while we hope that using the V-sorts methodology would be helpful in helping the person that we need to gather this information, it's also sadly upon us to look for our own healing in different ways.
Thank you both, Tiffany and Monet. I appreciate your very intentional grounding for us in the healing practices that not just involve individual connections, but also community of care, including the systems that are meant to provide us that support rather than to harm us further. A person in the chat also asked more broadly, how could people be better allies in this larger issue? So what does allyship look like for folks that may be connected to this work?
Before I let one of my other colleagues answer, I think it's also important, while the term allyship is often used right now, as we are going through these vast changes in community, we're learning that the term ally takes up space, advocate takes up risk. So when you say, how can we be better advocates in this larger work, is to take up risk and to be very cognizant of the realities that certain communities are facing within the school system. The school system is carceral by nature, and it disproportionately affects youth with disabilities who are either underdiagnosed or overdiagnosed, under supported, and over policed.
You're getting some massive praise in the chat for re-clarifying the terms. Rather than leaning into allyship, which can be problematic, we look toward advocacy, and for some even talk about accomplices, that you really invest the time and energy and take risk in order to align with the work that needs to happen. So thank you. Any other questions in the chat that folks may have for this last 30 seconds or so together?
Actually, I think one of my colleagues did want to finish up opening that question. I was just clarifying the terms of what we use.
Wonderful. Thank you. Please
Yeah.
do.
I didn't want to put Tamika on the spot, but as somebody who's currently, a veteran teacher, I would really like Tamika to offer her thoughts about what advocacy might look like in this space. Or I know she often talks about building partnerships with parents, so I want to give her a chance to say that.
Thank you for that. And I apologize, I missed some of that. We had very loud announcements going on. But Monet, I thank you for elevating advocacy, because I think that's really what we need. To me, sometimes ally is that empty word that gets thrown around, on a school level. What it really looks like is for parents and anyone who works in a school community to really be educated themselves on the types of students that get overrepresented in our special ed population, and to really be that advocate at the table for parents that you may know or realize don't truly understand what the process is. A lot of times teachers are speaking at a level that a lot of parents in our communities don't really understand. And as someone who has sat in multiple IEP meetings, those IEP meetings are a whirlwind. So just having that education from the bottom up, I think, is extremely important for parents to then really push for the things that they feel will work better for their children than some of the adults that are there for 9 months out of their children's lives. And not downplaying that at all, but I really would love for parents to become better advocates for their children in school settings, because they still do have the power, regardless of what the school makes them feel.
So powerful. Thank you, Tamika, for that additional elevation of parents and in their involvement in this process. We are a bit over time, and so I do invite us, if you had any further questions that we could potentially hold for another time or share separately in the chat. But thank you one and all for this group to be able to share your wisdom and your grace in this space with us.
Thank you so much, Brian.
You're welcome. Thank you all for attending.